seem to have confidence in this program. Why not? And is it appropriate to stay on as Public Safety Minister?
I have absolute confidence in this program. As you can tell, I have brought forward, I'm making this announcement today in collaboration with my colleagues as well as Cape Breton Police.
If you could go back. You said you're doing it because the Prime Minister...
Saying something that I will do differently is not saying that I don't have confidence in the program.
The Public Safety Minister this week insisting he believes in the federal government's gun buyback program. Comments that came after an audio recording of him casting doubt on the plan was leaked. In the taped conversation between Gary and Anandasangaree and an acquaintance, first reported by the Toronto Star, the minister can be heard questioning whether police will be able to enforce the law and signaling he would have carried out the program differently. Despite calls from the Conservatives for the Prime Minister to fire Anandasangaree, Mark Carney is sticking by him.
I have confidence in the minister. He's doing important work. He's got a lot of important work this session of Parliament, including legislation on borders and others.
So what's at stake with how the Prime Minister handles his Public Safety Minister? Our Sunday strategy session is here to talk about that. Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and Director of Communications for the late Jack Layton. Kory Teneycke was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former Director of Communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And Scott Reid is a CTV News political analyst as well as former Communications Director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hello, everyone. Good to see you. Scott, I'll start with you on this one. Why do you think in this instance, at this moment, the Prime Minister is sticking by this minister?
Probably for two reasons. First of all, I think what happened was embarrassing, but we've all done and said embarrassing things, and I think the Prime Minister is showing a bit of mercy. I mean, if I had $1 for every stupid thing I've said, I could buy half of Kory's wardrobe. So I think there's a bit of human consideration there coming from the Prime Minister. I'd like to imagine that part of it is also an acknowledgement on the part of the Prime Minister that he hasn't made his Public Safety Minister's job any easier. I mean, I continue to be puzzled by why they would lead on this issue of crime with the buyback program rather than on bail reform. And I say that because, you know, there are friends and critics of the buyback program, but it is definitively not seen as a frontline crime combating measure in the same way that bail reform and other get tough on criminals sort of measures that the government are promising is seen by the public. So I think perhaps the Prime Minister recognizes that he put his minister at a slight disadvantage in terms of the file. But look, you make a mistake like that, you have to play error-free ball from now on. Otherwise, the coach is going to yank you.
Kory, what do you think?
Well, it's not his first mess up. This guy's had several, and lapses of judgment, questions about writing letters of support for Tamil Tigers, etc. But this one is really pretty unconscionable, and I think it left out in the lead-in one of the more bad things, like saying that I'll bail you out, and if there's a gap in between the value of your firearms that are bought back
I'll compensate
and what you paid for them, I'll compensate you. Like this is the head of law enforcement in Canada saying that he's going to post bail for someone if they break the law, and that he will, that compensation is unjust, and that he will personally fill the gap. Like, can we think back to the Nigel Wright affair, where he paid back expenses for Mike Duffy, and what a kerfuffle that was? Like, it haunted the government for months and months. I don't see a huge material difference.
But that was something somebody did, not said.
Well, okay, but you're supposed to be. This is a judicial law enforcement position in cabinet. You're the guy who's supposed to not make mistakes on stuff like that. So I think it's worse than just embarrassing. I think this guy is a disaster, and I don't think he's going to be spared. I think there's a shuffle coming because of Freeland departing, and perhaps others will be departing too. I think there'll be a shuffle, and I'm gonna lay it on the line right now. I don't think this guy is going to be in this role in cabinet, if he's in cabinet at all, at the end of that.
Yeah, I'm inclined to think that, particularly given the significance of the portfolio, like to Kory's point, like it's one thing to say something, in a different job. Like Minister of Public Safety is nothing, particularly when, from a political perspective, crime is such a big deal right now in the House of Commons and outside.
Yeah, I mean, cue the cabinet shuffle speculation if it hadn't already started already. But what happened this week, when you look at how Prime Minister Carney responded to the news break, is he did a couple of things. He let his minister go out there. He said, okay, show, answer the questions, do the hard interviews, perform in question period. And to his credit, the public safety minister took a lot of hard questions this week. Will he survive in the long run? I'm not sure. But remember, Carney also had to make another reflection when the news broke about public safety minister. This is a campaign promise that the Liberals ran on. And a large part of their voter coalition, women, really want gun safety. In fact, the majority of Canadians don't want military-style, assault-style weapons that essentially are designed to kill as many people as fast as they can on our streets. And so this buyback program is a part of that promise that the Liberals made. And so I think that Carney felt that tension, not only to his voter coalition, those people who brought him this policy he ran on, and then he's testing out the public safety minister. Can he survive, and how long, and also there's a strategic reason to defend this minister right now. When a minister falls, it's like blood in the water for sharks, right? The opposition is working as hard as they can to take down this public safety minister, but trust me, they'll just go after another minister after that. So he's circling the wagons right now and trying to protect this minister until that larger shuffle, in fact, happens.
Yeah, there's a whole other conversation about how those comments even frame the debate around the actual policy, which I'll say, I know everyone wants to jump in, but I have another topic that I need you to weigh in on, unfortunately, but maybe fortunately. This week, late in the week, Ontario Premier Doug Ford took very square aim at Federal Justice Minister Sean Fraser over the federal government's intervention in a case before the Supreme Court on Quebec's Bill 21 over Section 33 of the Constitution, which is the notwithstanding clause. I'm going to play the clip, and then I'm going to get all three of you to weigh in.
There's not one person I've talked to that has said, we want to give the judges, more politically appointed judges, more authority. I haven't heard one person. But he's so bent on going up there, he messed up the immigration, he's messed up housing, now they put him in as Attorney General. He needs to focus on what counts for the people. Premiers across the country are on fire. This is the worst decision Prime Minister Carney has ever done.
All right, Scott, I'll start with you. Long-standing debate over the use of the notwithstanding clause. The federal government has very specific things that they would like the Supreme Court to weigh in on vis-a-vis the Bill 21 case, but it has ignited some backlash from premiers, more specifically in this instance, Doug Ford. Why do you think that is, and who do you think's in the right?
Well, I think the federal government is absolutely in the right to place questions, to ask the court for a little bit of guidance and perhaps even some narrowness with respect to the use of Section 33. The notwithstanding clause is in the Constitution, but a right is a right is a right unless Doug Ford or Danielle Smith disagree with it, unless the government of Quebec doesn't like the fact that you're wearing a Christian cross or a yarmulke or a hijab. Sorry. It is legitimate for the federal government to say, look, if you are going to use this power in a blanket way, trampling people's individual rights and robbing them of recourse to the courts, well, then it's reasonable to ask whether that ought to be used. That extraordinary power ought to be used by governments in some sort of prescribed way. Surely it should be used in only the most narrow of circumstances, only after meeting the highest of thresholds. Those are the questions the government's putting to the federal court, to the Supreme Court, and thank God they are. Because, at a time when we see Donald Trump abusing the power of office, it is a reasonable thing to ask whether we want to fall into the trap of pure majoritarianism where governments are able to just walk past people's rights without recourse of any kind. This is a healthy debate to have in a democratic society. And I think the cavalier attitude that you get from the likes of Doug Ford is troubling. We're talking about people's individual rights and government's ability to ignore that.
My instinct tells me Kory might fall on the other side of that debate. Over to you, Kory.
Well, as inconvenient as it is for federal Liberals to acknowledge, without a Section 33, there would be no charter. There would be no charter. And the thought that you can change the Constitution without actually going through a constitutional amendment is completely undemocratic. It's completely wrong. And look, there's a lot of things that different premiers disagree on. This is one that I think there's almost universal agreement on, that Section 33 is there for an important reason. And I'll point out an example that's different, but very recent. To get rid of bike lanes that have been in place for 4 months in Toronto, you had a court say that that was a charter right to have a bike lane? Are you kidding me? If the courts were more responsible in their rulings, you would see less appetite on the part of provincial premiers to use Section 33. So there's a problem for sure. It's a problem in the judiciary. And the solution to judicial activism is not more judicial activism. If the Liberals want to change the Constitution, go ahead and change it. I dare you to. I don't think you're going to be successful in getting rid of it.
Change the Constitution.
Well,
That's not.
Hold on. Let Kory finish. Scott, I'll get you back, and I'll get
court
Kathleen too. Go ahead, Kory. Sorry.
Yeah, look, if you want to actually change limit the use of Section 33, change the Constitution, put it in there. Don't ask unelected judge to go in and do it, especially when you've seen judges run roughshod over the rights of legislatures on things as routine as removing a bike lane, for gosh sakes.
Scott, go for it, and then I'll get Kathleen.
No one is talking about altering Section 33. It is entirely established in jurisprudence that you might have some discussion about what the tests are for the application of such a sweeping power, particularly when you have governments like Doug Ford saying, for 5 years, we're just going to blanket trample people's rights and give them no recourse to courts.
This
is a matter of
trampling.
interpretation and application. And, you know, to suggest that the federal government is trying to reopen the Constitution, that is false, misleading, and it's just this clear classic small c conservative argument, which is we should not have had a charter and we should not protect people's individual rights from the majority in the first place.
Okay, Kory,
Nonsense.
go, and then I promise the last word is Kathleen.
That is total nonsense. There is not blanket application of the charter going on. But I'll tell you, I'll make one other point, and this is on the politics of this. You know, one of the most obvious dance partners for the Carney minority government is going to be the Bloc Québécois. They're opening up a culture fight around this. They're opening up a fight with every provincial government, virtually. They're uniting, Quebec and Alberta and Ontario and from coast to coast. Provinces are going to be united in opposition to this. And what? So a handful of people who are charter zealots can pump their fist in the air. Well, you know, I'm not sure that that's in keeping with the mood of the country right now. Sorry to say.
I heard a lot of conservatives arguing that the use of Emergency Powers Act ought to be quite constrained and narrowed during the convoy protests.
Okay, last word to Kathleen. Split the. I got to give Kathleen the floor, guys. Thank you.
I mean, as you can see, it's really the constant fight between conservatives and liberals around the idea of who should be in charge, people, politicians, or the courts, right? And that fight has been going on for some time. But I actually think what the liberals are asking for, the slight clarification that they're asking the courts for, is not something to like light your hair on fire about. But remember, the reason why people like Premier Doug Ford and others are getting worked up about it, and as we just saw in that clip, is because Doug Ford has repeatedly tried to normalize the use of the notwithstanding clause. Remember, he tried to use it to silence people in the middle of an election in 2021. And in 2022, he tried to use the notwithstanding clause again to shove a bad deal on the backs of workers, right, to reduce their wages. That's how he has used the notwithstanding clause. So it's important to remember how these premiers are trying to weaponize this tool and why they're being so voiceful and strong, advocating against the Liberals getting into it. But for sure, there's a question.
You have to mention Quebec in that as well, right? Like Bill 21 was, I mean, no federal politician running in the election when Bill 21 was on the table would even say they were against it. But now, when it comes to a fight before the Supreme Court, they're finally willing to put a position on it.
Very brave, very, very brave of them.
Okay, I got to leave it on that note. We will definitely pick up the conversation next week on that. Kathleen Monk, Scott Reid, and Kory Teneycke, our Sunday strategy session. When we come back, the deficit debate continues on Parliament Hill as the Parliamentary Budget Officer projects a significant shortfall. What does the new forecast mean politically? The Scrum with Stephanie Levitz, Joël Denis Belvance, and David Coletto is up next.